It's Friday, the 12th of May, 2023.
The last word in podcasting news. This is the Podnews Weekly Review with James Cridland and Sam Sethi.
I'm James Cridland, the editor of Podnews.
And I'm Sam Sethi, the CEO of Podfans.
In the chapters today, Acast's financials, Amazon paying people to listen to podcasts, Bumper's listen time, broadcast to podcast, and is it too soon to call podcasting on YouTube a flop? Plus...
Hello, it's Rob Lowenthal from Spotify, and I'll be on later to talk about Megaphone's new broadcast-to-podcast technology.
Hi, I'm Sharon Taylor. I am the SVP of Podcast Strategy at Triton Digital, and I'll be on later to talk about our broadcast-to-podcast strategy.
I'm Darby Doris, Director of Content at Listen, and I'll be coming up a bit later to talk to you about the podcast show, what we're doing there, our original Unboxed, and the wider plans here at Listen.
And Tom Billington will give us a preview of the podcast show in London later this month. If James had remembered, he would have asked Tom for an intro, but he forgot. What an idiot.
They will. This podcast is sponsored and hosted by Buzzsprout. Last week, 3,994 people started a podcast with Buzzsprout. Podcast hosting made easy with powerful tools and remarkable customer support. And now you can turn your listeners into supporters with Buzzsprout subscriptions. Go on, give it a whirl with us at weekly.podnews.net. And we're brought to you by Podnews Live, where podcasting connects in Manchester in June. You can get your tickets today at podnews.net/live.
Podnews Live, where the podcast industry connects. Get your tickets now at podnews.net/live. From your daily newsletter, the Podnews Weekly Review.
So, James, let's kick this off with a little stat. Over the last week, 215,550 podcasts published at least one new episode. That seems like a very good number.
Yes, indeed. And actually, you'll find lots of data on the Podcast Business Journal website, podcastbusinessjournal.com, which is a sister publication to Podnews. And another bit of data on there is that there was a new podcast episode posted every 0.9 seconds in the last 30 days, which is interesting. I know that we last week gave a number of 1.5 seconds, but apparently it's 0.9 seconds. So there's a thing. Anyway, yes, lots of exciting numbers.
Talking of numbers, Acast released their financials. Ross Adams and Emily Villate released their Q1 2023 results. What was the overall view of it, James?
Well, the overall view is it's slow and steady wins the race. I think they have seen net sales growing 11% for the quarter, year on year, which is £25.8 million. Pounds, there's the thing. Though net sales in North America actually dropped a little bit. So perhaps there are two stories going on. There's the story of podcasting out of North America, and there's the story everywhere else. Anyway, they're working with 2,300 advertisers across the globe as well, and they say that they now host more than 100,000 registered podcasts globally, which is quite a number. Having said that, they're not quite profitable yet, are they?
No, they didn't quite hit that number, but they have got 100 million monthly unique listeners, which is, again, another good stat for them. I think the overall is they're cutting down on costs and they're slowly increasing their revenues, which will eventually, in 2024, I think they're targeted to hit proper profitability.
Indeed. And it all looks as if everything is going in the right direction. So well done to Acast. That's a splendid thing. Meanwhile, other companies beginning with A are getting out the checkbook, aren't they?
Yeah, well, I think it's if you can't beat them, pay them. It seems Amazon, down your way, mate, are paying some Australian listeners, God, you're going to be rich, in vouchers just for listening to a podcast on a platform. First of all, why? And secondly of all, how much money have you made, James?
Well, I am not eligible, apparently. I think this is for people that haven't yet listened to a podcast on Amazon Music. And if you're one of those people, then you can claim $5 Australian, which is about $3.39 in Freedom Cash, just for listening to a podcast on the platform. So you need to download the Amazon Music app and then have a listen to a show on there. Really interesting seeing Amazon basically trying to really push the amount of trial going on that platform. So I just mentioned that the Podnews Daily is just 5 minutes long. You have to listen to a podcast all the way through. So, a nice quick podcast is always a good plan. So you can give that a go if you are eligible, but there's a special link that you've probably been emailed if you are. So give that a go. They've also been buying other things, not just listeners, but they've been buying an AI platform called Snackable, which they bought at the end of last year. Tech from that will appear in the Amazon Music app, and they're doing pretty well from podcasting anyway. Amazon's CloudFront is on a 12-month high in terms of the podcast share, 51.56% of all new podcast episodes in April were being hosted on Amazon's CloudFront in some way, shape or form. So they're doing particularly well. Whatever happens if that system falls over, you won't be able to get any podcasting. You won't be able to get any of our websites as well, I tell you, because both the Podnews website and the Podcast Business Journal are also on there too. So, so who knows what's going on there?
Well, we're hoping to get Craig Strachan, who's the Amazon European podcasting director, onto the show. That's if I can get past the PR people who are being gatekeepers this week and last week and the week after and the week after. But if they can get out of the way, Craig will love to come on the show. So hopefully he will in a few weeks' time.
I'm looking forward to seeing him in a couple of weeks when I'm in London. And of course, you will too, because the podcast show is coming, isn't it?
It is. It's. I feel like we've been talking about this for 9 months. Feels like the gestation of a baby, but it is here. I'm actually looking forward to this one. It is based on last year's show, which was fantastic. Well done to the team there. This one looks bigger and better. So, yes. Are you excited, James?
Yes, I'm very excited. I am doing the opening keynote, which is going to be very cool. Please, if you're going to get to the podcast show... Sorry,
I've got to ask, suit, no suit?
Suit.
Just got to be clear.
Definitely suit. Most definitely. It's a dress-up.
Well done, yes.
Most definitely, yes. You have to get that early if you are doing the podcast show, because I'm on at 9:10 a.m. I think doors open at 8:30. So please turn up nice and early. I'm in the Amplify Theatre. It's a theatre for 400 people, so I don't want it to be half empty. But I am the warm-up guy for Ashley Flowers. If you come to see me, then also you get to see Crime Junkie's Ashley Flowers, so that's a good thing. There's some real excitement about this event, so I caught up with Tom Billington from the podcast show, and I asked him what he's looking forward to.
First of all, just to say we're so excited to have it back. After a first year, where we going in this time last year when we spoke, we had big plans. We were selling the dream. We knew what we wanted to do, but then when we delivered it, we have been blown away by the response to year one, and then now leading into year two, where we are at with it as well. In terms of the international reach, we always wanted to have an international show and saw an opportunity there. But really, as we're just over a week out now, and we see the numbers that are coming in and traveling from around the world, over 35 countries are represented through our speaker program and through the delegates that are coming. Obviously, good showing from Europe, as you'd expect, in the UK. But, like yourself, traveling over from Australia and that region, and Asia, South America and the US as well, bringing the community together. That's what I'm really looking forward to, getting everyone under one roof in London. And it's great to see for this year as well, as we head into year two, the organic nature of it as well. So as the communities coming together, people are taking the opportunity around Islington and around London for pop-up events, and just really using that gathering throughout the show's 2 days on the 24th and 25th, with a preview night that we're doing on the 23rd. But around the week, the community is coming together and using that time in London to really, to get together and meet and have meaningful conversations outside of the show as well, which is amazing to see.
Yeah, I'm looking forward to the Podnews drinks, which are happening the previous night. Don't ask to come if you've not been asked. Then you're not coming. But in terms of what's new this year, you've added a preview night.
Yeah, we have. Yeah, I mean, again, because we saw a lot of people travel to London for the show, we wanted to maximise it out. And that preview night really, it's on the 23rd. It's 3 3 hours. It's an intimate look at the show. Everything will be set within the venue. We're handing out a Trailblazer Award, which is new for this year. So it's really looking at someone on the international, within the international industry, who's making amazing moves, who's doing brilliant things. And that's going to Ashley Flowers this year. And so, we've looked at what Ashley's been doing within, obviously, the true crime space and building her brand out. And again, using the platform of podcasting, but really creating an amazing platform globally. So we're handing out the award and giving that honour out. And then what we've done as well for this year is we've built out an advisory panel, which we thought was really important because, with the show positioned well on the international scale, we wanted to make sure that as we grow, we do it in a way that is representative of the industry, and that we pulled together 10 people from different parts of the industry, again, on the international, looking at it internationally from those in the US, like Oren Rosenbaum or Donald Albright, as well from Tenderfoot TV, looking at the UK market with production company leaders as well. And it's really just those 10 people are there to hold us to account and make sure that we're on the right track with the show. And they helped with the advisory of who we're giving the Trailblazer Award to. They'll be there on preview night as well. Other things for preview night is that we'll have an in-conversation with Fern Cottam, who is, UK-based podcaster, done brilliant things building out Happy Place, the brand as well. So we're really just wanting to shine a spotlight on the show. People that can come down. There's a few tickets left for that, but again, it's an intimate first look at what's going on. All the stands will be set and exhibitors will be there. It's really just a pre-party to what's to come for people that are in London that night before.
Yeah, and I'm looking forward. You mentioned Ashley Flowers. I'm looking forward to being her warm-up man on the Wednesday morning, which should be great fun. It sounds a really great show. I know that we've got later on in this show, we've got Darby Doris from Listen, and we'll be talking to him about what his company has been doing for the show as well. Is attendance looking good? Is it up on last year?
Yeah, it is. So we had about 5,300 through the doors last year, and already we've outsold that. So we're in a really healthy place. We're looking at probably around 6,500 people for the daytime event. Again, which is we are ecstatic about. And again, we're always looking to build. So whatever level you are within the industry, we want to make the show for you. And ticket prices again, we've wanted to make as accessible as possible. For it's £30 ticket for under 30s, it's £69 for a daytime ticket. So we want to make sure that whether you're just starting out as a creator, right through to the professional production companies and the marketeers, through to the CEOs, this show is really for you. So in terms of ticket sales and those that are coming through the doors, we feel super happy at where we are, and just encourage people to get the tickets now before the show, because I can't imagine too many will be available on the door this year.
Yeah, no, absolutely. And if you use the coupon code Podnews, then who knows, you might save a little bit more money on those tickets, which are very reasonably priced anyway. What sort of people go to this? There's a thought from our friends in America that podcasting in the UK, well, it's just the BBC and some other radio broadcasters, and that's kind of it. Is there lots of radio broadcasters there, or what kind of split is there in terms of people?
I mean, we are just down the road from the UK's broadcast industry hub. We're a stone's throw away from King's Cross, where there's the media district now as well in London. So, the BBC is there in a big way, yes, of course. But then Acast and Amazon Music and Wondery are our headline sponsors this year. You've got Spotify returning. Global back in a big way as well, and Sony Music Entertainment. So you've got the core in the podcasting and the audio space and the traditional media brands as well. New partners for this year, just to give a bit of context around that as well. So Sky News are going to be coming down in a big way. They're going to be broadcasting live from the show on the Wednesday morning as well, which we're really excited about. That's a great addition. You mentioned Listen. as well. So the production company element of the industry is showing up this year as well, more so than last year, which is brilliant to see. Obviously, the lifeblood of the creativity of the podcasting industry. And, you know, just to mention Listen as well, they've got their own stage this year as well, which is the Rise Up. And they've programmed that. I want, you know, if Dobby's going to talk about what they've got coming up on that, I'll just tease that. But it's brilliant, and they've done an amazing job at looking at the industry in a way that just the vibrancy of it, and not just a traditional way. Other areas, just to give context of those that are coming down, New York Times are one of our partners this year as well as Tortoise Media. So those news brands, The Guardian, are coming back as well. Interestingly, what we've seen is an uplift in talent agencies wanting to put their talent forward. Obviously, huge, podcasting for talent and traditional presenters in the media space is massive, and the attention of the agents to the show, like YMU, United Talent, WME, putting their talent forward has been good to see as well. But in terms of who it's for, whatever level within the industry, the show is for you. If you're a creator, an independent creator, we want to make the show feel inviting to you as much as we do to the big companies that I've just mentioned as well. So if you are looking to get a ticket and you are a creator, you will be able to come and Acast have got what's called Creator Economy Corner. It's a corner of the show that Acast are taking over, which is inviting, like a Genius bar if you walked in the Apple Store, where you can get advice on every different aspect of starting out, whether that's marketing or socials or hosting. That's scattered throughout the show as well. That advice and inspiration is there for you. So I just want to make sure that we're landing that point that we've got the big brands there, but this is really for the independent community as well.
Yeah, well, very good. The website is thepodcastshowlondon.com. And as I say, if you use the code Podnews, then who knows, that might save you a little bit of money. So looking forward to it, Tom, in a couple of weeks. I'm looking forward to coming home and seeing if London is still standing. So thank you so much. I look forward to seeing you then.
Looking forward to seeing you.
There we go, Tom Billington. And yes, I think it will be. If you haven't got your tickets already, I suggest you do. You can still buy tickets for the event using the code Podnews, and you'll get a discount. And if you get to see James as well. So it's a double whammy.
Yes, you get to see me in the suit and everything else, so that's going to be good. Really looking forward to that, and more news about what's going on at that show a little bit later on in this one.
Now, a couple of weeks ago, Spotify launched their broadcaster podcast platform with Megaphone. They bought at the end of 2021 a company called Whooshka out of Australia, which was owned by a guy called Rob Lowenthal. The technology platform that they bought let radio broadcasters turn their existing audio content into on-demand podcast content. And I used it for my radio station, River Radio, and it worked like a dream. Today, we're excited, they say, to share that the technology is now available for any publisher with a Megaphone account. Well, we talked about this, James, about is this a trend, given that you've got both your radio hat and your podcast hat on? Do you see this being the next stage for radio people?
I think it's certainly important for radio people to be getting the most out of the content that they produce. I mean, obviously, their content is the thing that makes them unique. And so any way of taking the content that they have on the air and making that also available on podcast platforms makes a bunch of sense. So there's certainly a good reason why you should be doing that sort of thing.
Well, we reached out to Rob Lowenthal and I asked him to tell me more about what's the new Megaphone platform for broadcast to podcast.
Back in the day, probably 7 or 8 years ago, I was running a radio network here in Australia called Macquarie Radio. It was a talk radio network. And I remember thinking that it was difficult to take on-air content and then repurpose it and republish it as a podcast. So I remember thinking that the producers were having a hard time and they were spending a lot of time after they finished the shift trying to make this content. And that's why broadcast to podcast tools were built by us. It was really initially to help radio station producers save time making podcasts. Most sensible radio networks understood that they'd made content once, and what they should be doing was making that content work a little harder for them. So once it's gone out live across the airwaves, repurpose that content and share it as a podcast as well. Obviously doesn't cost any more in terms of content creation. It's already been made once, but it gives you another opportunity to, first of all, appeal to your listeners who may have missed that show for the day, but second of all, make some money. So make some more money digitally as opposed to the ads that you were previously running on your radio broadcast. So, in a very basic form, we built this technology to help radio broadcasters save time and make money. And they make money right now through plugging into Megaphone, repurposing this content, and then also plugging into what we call SPAN, the Spotify Podcast Audience Network, which is an advertising opportunity for them to have ads play against the podcasts that they've just taken from the on-air environment to the new off-air environment in a podcast.
I think in that sense, that's a great way, because I think radio people, I mean, we knew each other from when I had River Radio. That second bite of the cherry was always a very good way of doing it. And also the way that people consume content on demand or live, it gave that opportunity for people to do that. And also the good thing is Spotify's just expanded this SPAN network across Europe. So it's now available in more countries across Europe. So, that on the back of it for monetization.
Yeah,
is this broadcaster podcast, though, only available now as a Spotify platform? So previously under Whooshka, obviously I knew that I could then take any radio signal I gave you in the schedule that we created. That would then go to Apple, Google, and Spotify. Has this now just become a Spotify tool?
Oh, no, definitely not. So it's only available to Megaphone enterprise customers. It's available in their dashboard when they sign up. So it's out of the box, ready to go. You configure it yourself. You add the stream information. It can be ICcast, Shoutcast, or HLS. You add that information into your dashboard, and then you identify what kind of content you want removed from the feed. So once you've set up the time that you want it to record, you might want to record between 6 a.m. and 9 a.m. Monday to Friday. You'll then identify, and we also want to remove silence. We want to remove music. We want to remove a bunch of different stuff. Or you might want to identify inaudible tones that are 25 megahertz. And when those tones play from the studio, you're going to use that to identify where an advertising cue point and so on should be. But importantly, it's available out of the box. You put your stream URL information in, and then it's live. It's recording. And essentially, you're also running advertising in that podcast as well, because those cue points, where we replace on-air ads and on-air music with cue points in the podcast, they're capable of receiving an ad from the SPAN network.
Do those ads have a pre-qualification in terms of numbers of downloads or listens or anything? Is there a pre-requirement, or is it, once you've signed up, you can create points within the recording that the ad will serve at that point? Is there a pre-requirement on that ad?
No, there's not. So there's anyone who's a Megaphone enterprise customer who's also opted into the SPAN network for advertising can make the most of this tool, and also the ads that will run in the content. So the podcasts themselves the cue points go in places where the advertisements were on the radio broadcast. They go in maybe where music has been removed. The cue points will go in where there was metadata saying here's an ad. So these various cue points are going into the file, and then the advertisements will run. The producer always has the chance to overwrite anything in that audio file. So they might log into the dashboard and look at the audio file after the shift and remove some of those cue points. Everything that happens in this environment is non-destructive. So that whole recording is saved inside your Megaphone dashboard, and the cue points are just identifying segments where the technology, the AI, it uses quite sophisticated AI technology, where they think that the content should be replaced. But if a producer of a show says, no, we don't think that content should be replaced, they can just remove those cue points, and then everything will run as normal.
Okay. And what's the plan going forward then? Where does this functionality go next? What do you think you can add that will enhance what you've got?
I think in the first instance, we really want to now help broadcasters earn additional advertising revenue. The two things that when I talk to broadcasters, the two things they're keen on doing are improving their audience share, growing their audience, or improving the advertising revenue. So we're always focused on the customer, and we really want to help them improve their advertising revenue through SPAN is the next step. So we'll be looking at product features in that regard. But we really like the way that we've used certain AI technologies to identify, for example, different tones that come through from a broadcast studio. So you might set a tone that comes through at 30 megahertz for weather or 25 megahertz for traffic. And we can identify that content and change it or replace it. You may in the future even want to use certain technology to insert automatic AI-generated content as well into those cue points. So that's the kind of thing that we've built the foundations in the technology now that one day in the future, that's the kind of thing that you can do with this broadcast in real time.
One of the things I think Spotify has got a really unique position in the world is that it is global. It is a music player, and it must have, therefore, licenses globally with all of the various bodies that take licensing fees, because that's one of the biggest things that, we know trying to broadcast a podcast that had music in it onto the internet. Some people might just ignore it. Other people, for example, will allow that through. But if you were taking a radio show, let's say a breakfast show, which has got a lot of music in it, and you wanted to rebroadcast that through your platform, today all that music would have to be taken out because there's no license for that out of country anyway. Would you see Spotify being the one platform maybe that would provide that capability? Because you've got things like AI DJ and you've got things like the radio capability that they produced last year, a couple of years ago, so it feels like it's sort of edging its way towards this ability where actually, you know what, put the whole of your show in, we'll deal with the licensing.
Oh, look, it's an interesting idea. Certainly, I'm not aware of anything that's proposed or on the roadmap at the moment. But look, Spotify do have wonderful relationships around the world with musicians and artists. They've got more than 500 million monthly listeners, on platform, or monthly average users. So they certainly understand music. I think really what we're focusing on here is podcasting. I know that when I worked in the radio industry, that we did strike deals with the local license agencies and the APRA and so on to stream music online, and that required for the radio broadcasters to pay a separate fee. And I believe they can also opt in to pay a separate fee for when they want to publish music inside of podcasts. So there are different licenses and different legal regimes around the world, and so I wouldn't comment probably on how it works all around the world, but definitely an interesting and novel idea for the future.
Okay, we'll watch this space. Rob, okay, tell us where we can go and find more about this new broadcast-to-podcast solution that you've got.
Yeah, absolutely. If you just go to the megaphone.fm webpage, there's a tile there to click on for broadcast-to-podcast, and that'll take you straight into all the information about broadcast-to-podcasts and how radio networks around the world can make the most of this technology.
Rob Lowenthal from Spotify and talking about broadcast to podcast. He's not the only company to end up doing that, is he, Sam?
No, we got a message from the wonderful Triton. Sharon Taylor reached out to us and said, look, hey, do you know we've been doing this for a little while as well? So we thought, oh, okay, well, I didn't. And so we reached out to Sharon. She's another Aussie, mate. You lot.
She is another Aussie. There seems to be something weird and wonderful going on with Australians in this particular area. But yes, Omni Studio was actually, when it first appeared, it was doing integrations with radio companies all over the place and doing some really interesting ideas. The original name for the company was 121 Cast. And you caught up with Sharon Taylor to ask more about Omni Studio.
Triton is, I guess, the Airbus or Boeing to the audio industry. So for 16 plus years. Triton started out as a streaming provider. So it did all the radio streaming and digital streaming for much of the world, and had this vision to take audio into the digital space out of terrestrial. And so today we do a pile of stuff. We obviously still have the streaming business. We have a streaming measurement. So we have an accredited streaming measurement system so to measure streaming all around the world. We also have podcast metrics, which does the same for podcasting. We have the Omni Studio product, which is where I came into Triton from for the podcast CMS distribution, hosting a huge monetization side of the company, including the world's first programmatic SSP for audio, and probably something else that I'm forgetting that my boss is going to be angry about, but that's a pretty good overview.
Oh, yeah, no, that's a pretty good overview. And if he is angry, just send him my way. Now, the other part of this was we were talking about on Podnews about broadcast to podcast, right, as I suppose, a trend in the industry that's been around, and radio stations are slowly waking up to the idea that on-demand podcasts of their live radio shows is a good thing to do. And, Triton then said, hey, by the way, we do this. So what do you do?
Great question. Okay, so yes, we at Omni Studio, so before we were part of Triton, in 2015, we built a way to capture a live stream and turn it into on-demand content. And for a long time, our slogan was on air to online in seconds. We actually built it as a sneaky way back in the day. Like, we had a consumer app, the same as every podcast startup seems to have nowadays, and thinking that we would change the world for podcast discovery and consumption. And we needed more content in there, more timely, small, bite-sized pieces of content. So we originally started talking to radio stations back in 2014 to say, hey, you have mic breaks, and usually it's localized, it's relevant, it's hopefully interesting, entertaining. And so we built this live stream capture to enable the stream to be chunked up into the Omni Studio UI and then repurposed either in segments onto social media or as a full podcast into the RSS.
And so the way that I would do it, so with my radio station that I had, we used Whooshka. And they gave me a schedule. I put in the schedule of the programs. I then gave them my RMTP feed. That was then converted by them into Apple, Google, and Spotify. Is that exactly how you guys work, or is there any differences?
Exactly, but it's similar. So we have a few different stream capture abilities. Like, we work with most of the largest broadcasters around the world. And so a lot of them have like HLS streams, for instance. And so we capture all of that. We read out of the metadata queues. So we have two different flavors of the agents, I guess you could say. We have one on-premise, which is just a tiny executable file that sits in that the broadcast managers can go in and create a schedule. So to your point, I think we can, at the moment, I think we've got maybe 2,000 different programs that record at any one given time with just like the recording agents. And you can tell it when to start and stop through cue points or through silence detection in the mics. And then you can either manually turn that and distribute it out to Apple, or I think 2018, don't hold me to it, but a few years ago we built a way to automatically do it as well. Right. With this idea that, most of the US radio stations especially are quite time poor. And so if we could free them up from putting the show together, then they could, the theory was, make more original content.
Now, one of the things in podcasting, putting your podcasting hat back on, is the podcast namespace and something called the live item tag. I don't know if you've come across it much. It's this ability for you to put the HLS server, basically, that you mentioned, or the RMTP server, into your RSS feed. And so apps that can read the RSS feed with the live item tag support can say, that show is a podcast or it's a radio station, and it's actually now going live at this moment, and it lights up and tells people, as a push notification, you are now live. And so, for example, Adam Curry and Dave Jones do a Friday night show, Podcast Index, the podcast show, and everyone on various apps, Fountain or Curiocaster or various other ones, Podverse, for example, you get a notification, that show's just gone live. And it's like fundamentally the radio station telling you your show's now live. Now, I don't know if you've come across that at all.
No, I haven't, no. So we're familiar with the Namespace project, although they've stopped calling it that now, and it's
ESP.
Thank you, yes. And so we implemented the transcript tag a little while ago, that's chicken and egg for us, unfortunately. Like, you want the wider majority of apps to do it, but I haven't looked into that. I will. Most of our clients have got their own apps. And so I suppose we kind of see ourselves as like Switzerland in that, which is they already have their app for live and podcasts that they want to drive people to. But that's fascinating. That could be something really interesting to look at for them. Thank you.
We'll have an offline conversation. But where do you see the product evolving from your part, ignoring what we've just talked about? Where does, Triton's plans, do you see more radio stations? Is that just the, get a market share of radio stations, or is there product features you see developing within the application itself?
Probably a little bit of both. I mean, market share for us is pretty good. Like, I think we, at any one point in time, like almost 2 million recordings every 30 days. So coverage-wise, we're good. Obviously, as more international markets wake up to podcasting, this is a nice entryway for them. They can get started with content that their listeners are already used to, but move it into an on-demand space. Refining things continually, obviously, is important. So I think a little bit of both.
Yeah, so one of the things that Spotify, having taken Whooshkaa on into Megaphone, are adding the SPAN network, their advertising network on top. How do you offer your customers the ways of monetizing their content?
So we do a lot of direct sold. So we are very neutral. So as opposed to Spotify with our sales team, we don't want to compete with our own publishers on the platform. And so we provide them more of like a tool set, and then we really live and breathe that whole Switzerland neutral. And so give them all of that power to do it themselves. So they can replace the ad breaks with the stream and obviously automatically put in a marker for monetization for ads that they're selling that are more podcast specific, as opposed to traditionally shouty radio ads, which need to be shouty to get your attention in the car. And then also they can hook into the programmatic exchange. And so they can then monetize the show on both a live, on-demand and podcast method through that programmatic pipe.
Cool. Now, lastly, YouTube. I mean, again, coming into the market, video is being talked about. Spotify has video, Apple has video, and of course, YouTube itself. Would you ever see the product evolving from, let's say, radio to YouTube?
Yes, I think so. I mean, we already have clients that are publishing on YouTube. YouTube's had a bit of a battering in the press of late, I think, with the podcast numbers. Like, it hasn't become an overnight sensation, and everyone seems to be like clubbing it a little bit.
I mean, James and I might be involved in clubbing it today as well. But that's...
It reminds me of the Simpson meme, like, stop, it's already dead. I think that the podcast industry in general, we're really big on like shiny things. And, to your point, Apple has had video podcasts on their platform for a long while. And if people wanted to watch a podcast, they would have. Yeah. I think YouTube's really interesting, especially for broadcast. Like, if you think like the top 5% of broadcasters already put shows out on YouTube, they already have like live streams. That is what we're trained to watch. I don't know that anyone wants to watch us as two individuals. Well, no offense to either of us, like doing this,
Just be clear, nobody wants to watch me and James. That's for certain.
I mean, the beauty of podcasting is that I can go on and do interviews or interview other people, and like, I don't even know what this thing is behind me, but it doesn't matter. Like, it doesn't matter at all. But no, I mean, obviously radio stations are wanting to get into video. Like, it's another audience. It's not cannibalistic, which I think a lot of people have been wary about, that they don't want to go onto YouTube and then cannibalize their audience. But it is additive from what we're seeing in our tests at the moment. And so we'll be rolling out some YouTube stuff in the coming months. And we're pretty confident that a new audience will emerge for a very specific set of shows.
Yeah, we're beginning to see a lot of radio shows over in the UK. TalkSport constantly are pushing out all of their radio shows as video shows now. And Global with the News Agent, which is one of the bigger hits here in the UK, is certainly pushing that out. So, yeah, I can see a lot more of that. Now, tell me, if I wanted to find out more about Triton and I wanted to find out more about this broadcast to podcast, where would I go, Sharon?
You can hit tritondigital.com. You could head to omnistudio.com. You could just Google it and I'm sure we'll come up.
Brilliant. Sharon Taylor, thank you so much.
Thank you, Sam.
There we go. Sharon. Again, somebody who will be in London with us as well, James.
Yes, absolutely. And looking forward to seeing Sharon. She's a good egg. There are a few other companies who are doing this. Stream Guys is another company who has been doing a bit of broadcast to podcast as well. And I think the main thing, and it's something that I will be talking about at the next radio conference that I'm at, which is Radio Days North America, which is happening at the beginning of June. Neither Spotify nor Omni Studio and Triton are talking about the lit tag, which is the tag that allows your podcast to go live. And that, to me, is a pretty sort of weird thing. Why you wouldn't focus on that if you were focusing on a broadcast to podcast platform, why you wouldn't be at least aware of the lit tag, even if you're not actually working on it right now.
Spotify didn't expect to, because that would mean they'd have to support the podcast namespace, and that's never going to happen. But with Sharon, it's interesting. She was interested to know more about it. So you never know. Triton might actually integrate. They already support the transcript tag, so they've already got elements of the podcast namespace in their offering. So this would just be a nice little extension for them.
Yeah, indeed. And of course, another place where you can be alerted when you go live is YouTube.
And there was a report from Ashley Carman last week saying podcasting on YouTube is a flop so far, which, again, pretty good headline. Was it clickbait, James, or was it real? Was she just pointing out a failure of YouTube?
No, I mean it's certainly real. I think Ashley has realised that there's public data available in PodTrack and there's public data available on YouTube. YouTube shows the number of views. And PodTrack, you can work out roughly what shows are doing. So, for example, if you just look at NPR, for example, NPR is doing 168 million global downloads per month. So that's a pretty good number for their 49 active shows. But if you have a look at their shows on YouTube, then they are doing 179 views. No, it's not 179 million. That's just 179. The figures are not particularly fantastic. Now, that said, Ashley had those figures. I shared Podnews Daily's figures, which are even worse, in fact. YouTube accounts for 0.9% of all consumption of the Podnews Daily. Clearly, again, it's showing that, podcasts about podcasts don't necessarily work too well on YouTube, as you would kind of expect. We're even worse on Spotify, by the way. But when you have a look at other shows, they're doing fantastically, aren't they?
Well, they say they are. So following the reporting about dismal YouTube numbers, Folding Pocket contacted you with details of Upfront with Simon Jordan, which was launched last week. So for those who don't know, that is actually a misleading piece of content. Right. TalkSport Radio have been broadcasting all of their live radio shows on YouTube now for nearly 2 years. Simon Jordan's show, 10 o'clock in the morning on TalkSport, is one of the biggest shows that TalkSport has. And of course, he's already built up a massive audience on YouTube with that first show. So all they've done is launch a second show, which they've been promoting on TalkSport for a gazillion weeks, to say Simon's going to be doing an interview show with various TalkSport other presenters like Graham Souness. No wonder you get an instant audience and a massive uplift. That is nothing to do with podcasting. So it's not a podcast. And it's a video show that is translated from an existing audience that already was promoted heavily.
Yeah, well, there you go. This is why it's important to have people in lots of different countries so that they can actually tell you the hidden side of that particular story. Because I looked at that and I thought, well, they're number one sports podcast on Spotify right now. They're number one on Apple Podcasts right now. But they've also got more than 500,000 views on YouTube. So they're doing really, really well with these very red-faced looking men shouting about football.
Yep.
But I was unaware of because I have no interest in sports ball, and I know that you are a big fan of over the Liverpool.
Yes.
So clearly that's going to be a work. But so it's okay. So that's clearly not necessarily comparing like with like there.
Not at all. No, I thought I'd just point that out for you.
Well, there you go. Always two sides of every story, aren't there? I think it's way too early. And I think it's also worth pointing out, of course, there are no podcasts on YouTube Music in the UK either. I went through a week or so of using podcasts on YouTube Music here because I have the technology to basically say to my phone, I want you to put all of my YouTube traffic through the US, please. And so then I got podcasts on YouTube Music. And it's fine, but it's all right. There's nothing particularly clever about the YouTube Music app. So, and I should point out, just yesterday, Google ended up promoting a brand new tablet or something, household tablet with a dock. And during the launch of this new tablet that Google were presenting, Google, the company that owns YouTube, stood there and said, well, what could you use this for? Well, you could use it for Spotify to listen to podcasts. Brilliant. Another triumph, YouTube. So who knows what's going on there? Bless them. But still, there you go.
Moving on. Podcast protection. Look, it seems this week NewsGuard, a news reliability data service, has announced it's entering into podcasting today. I didn't really get this story. And then there's a secondary story, James, that says Barometer has announced a partnership with NewsGuard to detect misinformation in podcast episodes. Now, I just sort of went, whatever. And then suddenly there was Mark from Captivate, and then there was Todd and Rob getting all heated, and then there was Dave Jackson and Daniel J. And I was like, wow, okay, I don't understand why everyone's getting heated other than there's someone checking the content of a podcast and determining if the advertising is appropriate. But everyone seems to be thinking this is a bad thing. So, James, tell me what's going on.
Well, so apparently you've got journalists, you've got human beings at this company called NewsGuard that are looking at news and information podcasts based on 5 journalistic criteria. And those criteria are conveys news on important topics responsibly, whatever that is, does not regularly convey false, unchallenged information, is not dominated by one-sided opinion, or discloses or does not have a political agenda, and all of this kind of stuff. And so based on their judgment, a podcast receives a score from 0 to 10, which is a risk level, and is accompanied by a detailed nutrition label that explains the score. So as an example, they say that the Journal from the Wall Street Journal gets 10 out of 10, gets a green label, and everybody's happy with that. Crooked Media's Pod Save America, which is most certainly one-sided. I've been listening to the UK version this week. That receives a green 9 out of 10 score. In terms of that particular show. But if you look at MSNBC's The Read Out, for example, that gets only 5 out of 10, and Louder with Crowder, whatever that is, also gets a 5 out of 10 score. So there are these anonymous journalists sitting in a room basically working out whether or not these particular podcasts are good or bad or not, and giving them all scores. So I don't know anything about these journalists. I don't know where they're coming from in terms of that. The thing that is more concerning, not just NewsGuard, these anonymous journalists sitting there basically saying, is this any good or not? Is Barometer, who are using the NewsGuard research to train their AI so that their AI detection works out whether or not this episode is likely to contain a false narrative. So is it likely to be true, or is it likely to be false? And they're using AI. I mean, at the end of the day, this is people's jobs we're talking about. This is people's revenue we're talking about. And some AI tool, which is being trained by these journalists hiding away in a room, doing their news reliability data service. I think this is a dreadful idea. And the worst thing that I would want, being in a very different country, is for some American journalists to be passing comment on the contents of this podcast, which is put together by an Australian and a Brit. Two Brits, but you know what I mean. Why the Americans think that they should be arbiters of truth when you look at the clusterfuck of that particular country, who knows what's going on? So yes, it's all a bit rubbish.
I just call it fake news. That's easy. That seems to be the easiest way of getting around it. No, look. This is like Google SEOing, and fundamentally they will change the output of their content in order to attract better advertising, in order to make more money, which then doesn't really take into account what the listener might want. It just happens to be what the advertiser wants. And of course, you and I probably, well, I certainly, you latterly will say, well, look, why don't you just use value for value and micropayments, and then you don't need to worry about what the advertiser thinks, because you can say what you like then. But hey, that's a little way down the road.
No, you could turn around and say, well, this is good. People will need to be more fair and balanced in order for them to get more ad revenue, and this is a good thing. And and the more reliable and the more truthful a podcast is, then the better it's going to be in terms of ad revenue. But it's not necessarily going to work that way either. And of course, as is usually the way with these tools, I can't find out whether or not they've vetted this particular show or any other shows that I do or the newsletter that I produce. I have no idea, and I'm not going to pay hundreds of dollars a month, which is what they want, to find out whether or not I'm a reliable source. I just quite resent anonymous journalists in a room working out, do we agree with this or not? I think it's a dreadful thing. Anyway.
Well, talking of ad spending, it seems that podcast ad spending in the USA is up 43.7% year on year. That sounds like a massive jump.
It does.
Is that number right, James?
It could be right. SMI is a very well-known and well-resourced media analysis company. They're here in Australia as well. A spokesperson for the company said that there has not been any sort of pullback in advertising on podcasts due to economic pressures, which is quite a statement, particularly quite a statement when yesterday Audacy's financials came out, or Wednesday, Audacy's financials came out, and podcast revenues fell in real terms. And the New York Times also published their quarter one financials and lower revenue from podcasts there as well. But no, podcast ad spending in the US apparently up 43% year on year. The interesting thing, though, is that podcasting is quite small in comparison to all of audio. If you look at all of online audio, podcasting is only 26%. So the majority is going to streaming audio, things like Spotify and that sort of thing. So perhaps there's additional opportunities for growth for podcasting there.
Now, the winners of the 2023 Pulitzer Prize were announced. The winners included Gimlet's Stolen, Surviving St. Michael's. It's the first podcast series to win both a Pulitzer Prize and a Peabody Award in the same year. That sounds very impressive. But, I mean, how does that translate into listener numbers and revenue, or does it not bother at all?
I think with all of these things, this is a award given in terms of quality of journalism, and that doesn't necessarily instantly fit in terms of revenue or indeed success, as you say. But I think, that particular show, it's the first big award for Gimlet. And to be able to get both the Pulitzer and Peabody Award and the DuPont Columbia University Award as well in the same year, I think is a pretty good thing. It's a story about what happened in Canada and the residential schools in Canada. It's well worth a listen as well. And there's a brand new show also starting on that as well fairly soon. I think, though, it's good news for podcasting because it does show that podcasting can be a very good place for investigative journalism.
I just wonder how long before an AI wins a Pulitzer. That's all I would say. The Writers Guild are on strike over it. They're not happy bunnies.
Yes, no, indeed. I mean, the writers are on strike, but that only affects fiction podcasts currently. But yes, I think AI is going to be an interesting thing. I have been playing today with Google Bard, which is available everywhere now, and giving that a little play and seeing if I can save myself a little bit of time by using Google Bard, and it seems to be interesting. So who knows whether or not that will at some point end up winning awards. Hey, let's go on to have a look at some job news. Bad news at Sony Music Entertainment, which has made some layoffs in its narrative podcast team, podcast marketing and sales. They won't say quite how many people have gone, but worthwhile keeping an eye on that. Good news for Miranda Kennedy, though. She's joined Vox as executive producer of Today Explained, which is their daily news show. She's got considerable experience of that. She was supervising senior editor at NPR for Up First and Morning Edition, so she knows a thing or two about that. And Megan Wastel, or maybe it's Wastel, I don't know. Anyway, she's left Global. Why are you interested in that? Well, she was director of podcasts and strategy for Global Player, and she's now going to work for Merlin Entertainments, which is an operator of visitor attractions, Malud. They run fun fairs and stuff like that.
Madame Tussauds.
Yes, strange old move, isn't it? From director of podcasts and strategy to be global creative director. But there we go. So best of luck to her for that. But she's no longer in podcasting. She's dead to us. If you're looking for a job, Podnews has podcasting jobs across the industry and across the world, and they're free to post as well. It'll just take 2 minutes to add a new role. Podnews.net/jobs.
Bit of an interesting fact about Madame Tussauds very quickly. Have you ever wondered what happens to waxworks that are no longer popular?
Presumably they melt them down.
No, this is what's super spooky. They take them to a warehouse in the city of London. I've been there, and they literally have them all there, stacked up in a warehouse. It is very spooky.
Wow, so you can see, Michael Heseltine in there and
yes.
John Gummer. What a terrifying thing.
Yeah, they don't melt them down. No.
Well,
they keep them all.
There you go. You could just melt them down. You could melt down. You could melt them down and use them as candles or something. Yes.
Gwyneth Paltrow will be in there soon.
Yes.
Now,
yes. Anyway, moving on.
The tech stuff on the Pod News Weekly Review.
Yes, it's the stuff you'll find every Monday in the Pod News newsletter. Here's where we do all of the tech talk. There's a new company called Snipped. Well, it's a company that's existed for a while called Snipped, which allows you to save podcast highlights. They've just added Android Auto support, although it looks a bit clunky, to be fair. But it does allow drivers to save podcast highlights while they're driving, so that looks good. And a very beautiful, privacy-friendly Android podcast app, AntennaPod. They have updated the app. It's available now on Google Play version 3, which has a brand new home screen, which is a really nice home screen. It gives you lots of choices of what to listen to next. It's got some good swipey actions. I used it for a couple of hours, and it was very nice. So if you are looking for a new podcast app, unfortunately, it hasn't got very much of the new podcast namespace in it yet. It's worthwhile giving it a go anyway. For Android devices, it's on F-Droid as well. AntennaPod is worthwhile taking a peek at.
James, still no news of that Apple podcast for Android?
No, still no news of Apple Podcasts for Android. I mean, they are going to do it because they're not stupid. And every week that they don't launch it, of course, Spotify gets even more of an unassailable lead. And so, of course, they're going to be launching Apple Podcasts on Android soon. They must do, mustn't they? But still no news of that.
Well, good news, James. For Apple, maybe. So at Google I.O., they announced WebAssembly, or WASM, which means you can take native apps and put them directly into the browser within the Android app. So maybe they could just use a little bit of WebAssembly and take the app and make it a native app on Android. There you go.
Well, maybe, although who knows? I mean, that would mean that Apple Podcasts would need more than one engineer, which they appear to have. They appear to have, by the looks of the speed of all of the updates, they appear to have one engineer. There's a new version of iOS coming out, I think, next week. I think they've just announced it. We don't know quite what's new in terms of Apple Podcasts in there, but you can bet that there'll be a very small amount of new stuff in there.
16.5. Right. Last week on the Podnews show with Dave and Adam, they talked about something called dynamic changing value splits, and they demonstrated it on the show, which was basically the idea of playing music in the middle of a podcast and being able to have the splits change based on the value time currently. And they did that last week.
They did, yes. And thank you for calling it the Podnews show. It is, of course, the Podcasting 2.0 show, but I'm sure that they won't mind being called the Podnews show. Anyway, yes.
That's true.
And very clever it was, too. If you were listening in a supporting app, of course, then as soon as Joe Martin came on and started warbling at us about something or other, then if you were to boost, or if you were just listening and paying using streaming sats, automatically Joe Martin would get some, which is really neat. So if you think of how a music show might work in the future, you might be playing, 10, 12 tracks in an hour. And as you play, the musician gets the money as their particular song is playing. So very cool, and seemed to work quite nicely. Didn't seem to break anything, which is always a good plan. So that was a smart test to hear. It wouldn't have worked if it was live, but it did work in terms of on demand. They had a very good sounding guest this week on the Podcasting 2.0 board meeting as well. Sam Sethi.
Yes.
It was you.
Yes.
You were very good.
Oh, thank you very much. Yes, I thought I'd take everything you've taught me, and I thought I'd just regurgitate it. It's very easy.
Yes. It was always good to hear Adam criticising your editing. That's always.
That's why we handed it over to you. No, that's why we handed it over to you. Let's be clear. Yes.
It's very, very good to hear that. So, but no, it was a good show. So hurrah! And it's really good to hear that Adam is well, and all of the quite horrifying work that he's having done. It's good to hear that he was certainly sounding well on the show. So good for him.
All I'd say is kids don't touch drugs. Now, moving on.
Got no idea where that's come from. But anyway, moving on. Headliner has announced that it has created 6.5 million short-form podcast videos so far. You probably know Headliner for the big long-form shows that they do on YouTube. So if you were, for example, listening to this show on YouTube, then that's done by Headliner, and that's why it looks so beautiful. But they also do short-form videos as well. Apparently those work really, really well on social media. So that is good. And they are working on something on WordPress.
Yeah, I mean, they've had this product for a while called Disco, which was the ability to take content and link it. But now they've made that free. So they're introducing Disco Free. It's a WordPress plugin. And what it allows you to do, it's easy to use as a podcast discovery tool, they say. So you add that to your WordPress install, and what it will look at is the text within your blog posts, and it will contextually try and find a relevant podcast or episode to place at the bottom. A bit like one of those Tambolo type things where they have snippets of audio.
Oh, yeah.
So it's going...
Taboola, yeah.
So it's going back against your own content to find podcasts that you might have done that you can then promote alongside your own content.
Yeah, well, there's a thing. It's worthwhile keeping an eye open for that. Also worthwhile keeping an eye open for what Google I.O. announced. They announced all kinds of stuff to do with AI, because of course they did, didn't they? And it's tedious and dull. But they did also announce a thing called Baseline, which is very good if you're a web developer, in that, what they seem as if they've basically done is that they have bought caniuse.com, which is a really easy and simple and straightforward, can I use the mark tag? Can I use the bold tag? And they've basically launched a thing called Baseline, which flags web features that developers can rely on all browsers supporting, so they say. And they're working with Mozilla's Firefox, Apple's Safari, and Microsoft's Edge. Well, Microsoft's Edge is much the same as Google Chrome anyway, but, the other two aren't. So Baseline looks quite interesting. I've noticed it's already live on the Mozilla website, so that's all very smart. And do you think there are sort of things that podcasting can learn out of that?
Yeah, I mean, look, the Podcasting Standards Project, great that it's announced, great that it's launched. And now I want to see something coming out of it more than just a couple of tags and a logo. And again, I think I've been banging this drum and, we want the Wall of Fame or Shame, whatever you want to call it, but something similar to Can I Use This? Or now Baseline, where, the Podcasting Standards Project says, right, here's all the hosts, here's what they currently support and here's what they don't support. And just let's get a table of this, because right now,
great, wouldn't it?
Yeah, right now, if you're an app developer, you're going, well, I don't know if Buzzsprout support this, don't know if RSS support that, blah, blah, blah. It would just be really quick and cool.
You were banging on about this last week.
I was.
And I was saying, yes, an Airtable would be a good idea. You've reminded me that Nick from Visi has done quite a lot of work on chapter support in various apps as well, and has sent me a spreadsheet, which I still haven't done anything with. So I really ought to be doing something with that as well. But I do think that there's something there. And I love the idea of putting that into the Podcasting Standards Project. If we are saying that, for example, episode images are a good thing, then let's name and shame the apps that don't support it.
Exactly.
That don't support it properly for all shows. I think that would be a good idea. So, yeah, I mean, it would be great to hear something from the Podcasting Standards Project. I covered their launch PR, and that's it. Haven't heard a sausage out of that group since. I do hope it's not going to go away, because I think it's really, really needed. It'd be good to see a little bit more from them. One final thing in terms of tech, and I think this is pretty cool, is Auphonic, which many people use to tidy their audio up, and I'm told that Buzzsprout uses it under the hood as well for their magic mastering. They've added an automated silence cutting service, so if you have great big gaps of silence in your podcast, it will automatically cut those out, which is nice.
Yeah, no, I understand how that works, because Descript does it as well, and various other companies do it. But often you've said Overcast does this as well, but that's an app, so that must do it in post-production. So how does Overcast do it?
Yeah, so Overcast and Pocket Casts and various other things have a silence skip service in those apps as well. I think, reading the press release from Auphonic, I think they're basically doing this as a, big gaps if you're in the production process. So it will basically get rid of those bits where you went off to answer the door and do all of that. So it will get rid of all of those automatically. I would personally like, when I upload a podcast to a podcast platform, it spots that there's, more than 5 seconds of silence and goes, are you sure that this is properly edited? Or indeed edits those out anyway. I've been caught out in the past doing that, and it'd be quite nice if that were the case. So, but always good to see more of these tools appearing to automatically catch mistakes and stuff like that from these, on these services.
Podcast events on the Podnews Weekly Review.
Well, in events and awards this week, the German-speaking public can now vote for the Deutsche Podcast Prize. You've until May the 28th. Just do a Google search for that if you know how to spell that. And if you don't know how to spell it, you're not German and you can't vote. The DuPont Columbia Awards are open for submissions as well. If you've done what they call important work from July the 1st last year to the end of June this year that features deep original reporting in the public interest, then you should be entering those awards. They are very prestigious in the UK. very prestigious in the US. Moving on to events, I'm looking forward to going to Auckland. You always know when it's time for me to go to Auckland because there's more massive floods, and the government has just announced an emergency in Auckland. And so, of course, I'm going to be flying into that on Friday. Of course, I'm going to be flying into that today, so that's going to be good fun. But the New Zealand Podcast Summit is tomorrow, Saturday in Auckland. There's all kinds of other people there. Tim Watkin from RNZ, who's a great chap. Richard Palmer is making the trip from Sydney, who works at Omni Studio alongside Sharon Taylor as well. And there will be a Podnews podcoaster in the goodie bag. Which is a good thing. Other things going on, podcast movement in Denver, of course, in August, the British Podcast Awards in September, Radio Days North America in Toronto in June, the Dubai Podfest is returning next week as well, and of course, the Podcast Show 2023 in London in just a couple of weeks' time.
Yeah, I basically bumped into Darby Dorris. I was at the podcasting pod pitch at City University. Darby was one of the judges, and I thought I'd ask him about what he's doing with Listen, but also more importantly what they're doing on the Rise Up stage at Podcast Show.
For those who don't know us, we are one of the UK's biggest and leading audio production companies. So we're sort of long-standing audio company in the UK, and we have a sort of heritage in radio. We still make a ton of radio, and that's kind of a long-standing bit of the business, been there for a very long time. But obviously podcasting is what we moved into and became the sort of the largest kind of growth area of the business. And we make, I suppose the best way to kind of carve up our podcast slate is into three buckets, really. So we make a huge amount of kind of commissioned content. So for the big commissioners like Titting About with French and Saunders for Audible, and they a ton of stuff for them, or 28-ish Days Later last year was a kind of brilliant commission about the menstrual cycle with India Rakison that was for BBC Radio 4, BBC Sounds, and then our next bucket, if you like, is for branded. We still make an absolute ton of kind of branded podcasts direct with brands or with agencies, and that's still a really important part of the business. And then the final bucket is our original. So we launched our first Listen original towards the end of last year, which perhaps we'll come on to, which is a program called Unboxed with Jordan Schwarzenberger. So yeah, that's the way to summarize the content we do. And then I think that we make a huge variety, really, of genre and format. So hopefully some of those I've referenced give you a sense of that. But we make, Love Island the morning after, the official ITV podcast. We make Built to Thrive with Dr. Rangan Chatterjee, which is a daily wellness podcast for Amazon Music, Wondery. Real kind of breadth of content across the kind of entertainment and narrative kind of opportunities.
No, a lovely wide selection there in the slate. How do people, because obviously last night we were at Pod Pitch, which is basically students pitching an idea about a new podcast they might like to create, with a bit of fun. But in the real world, how does somebody approach, say, Listen with an idea, and what do you look for when you are commissioning?
Yeah. So we're always having conversations, and I think that it doesn't just have to come to me. Like, I'm always open to hearing ideas, and I'm very available on all the sort of obvious social platforms and via email, which is just darby@listen.co.uk. So always open to approaches, and they're kind of constant, to be honest with you, which is a good thing. And they're not all going to be viable. They're always going to go forward. But I, would encourage other producers out there as well to kind of have conversations with us, on all of my exec team. And it's wildly different to where it was 3, 4, 5 years ago. And I think we all know that there's sort of success stories that happened then that probably wouldn't happen in the same way now. And I think that's across like the full spectrum in terms of the kind of content that's out there. So yeah, I think we're really tough on them, but we're really open to kind of those conversations. And they're the fun bit of the job, which is having those conversations with people, journalists and freelancers and all sorts of other kind of entities, if you like, that bring us ideas or bring us a kernel of something and then kind of working on that. But it's a slow process, in all honesty. I think probably it's slower now than it ever has been because everyone's tough on ideas and commissions are hugely important. There's probably fewer of them than there were. People are going kind of a bit slower and going bigger, I would say. And we're doing that too. And I think that's across the board. So yeah, but very much keen to hear from people always. And like I say, that's a fun bit of the job.
How do you metric success then? I mean, what is success to you? Is it downloads? Is it revenue generated? Is it recommissioning from a third party, a brand, or, a commissioning agency? What does success mean to you?
Yeah, that's a great question, isn't it? I think for us, because what's different about us to some podcast organizations is we've those buckets I was talking through. We've got so many bits to listen. And I think that's part of our success, really, is that gives us ultimately flexibility to be able to kind of pivot when the market's doing something or not doing something. And so therefore, for us about the growth of the business, we've got to be, commercially viable, but it's also about, the optics of stuff, isn't it? It's about kind of going, actually, here's a podcast that we might want to make because we think that it's creatively ambitious and that's a kind of direction that we want to put ourselves in. Might not be the most commercially viable. On the flip side, we might look at something and go, that's not exactly the most exciting thing that we're going to make, but we're going to make it because actually that's an important part of the business and it will be, something that's kicking off a margin and helping fund other parts of the company and the team and everything else. So I think that it's a hard question to answer, to be honest with you. I think success is kind of means lots of different things. And I think we look at all of those options depending on what the thing is on the table, really, and kind of go, and who's funding it as well. If it's an original that we're self-funding, we're kind of, we're looking at that in a different way to something that might be commissioned, so all of those things I think are probably not kind of new for most people listening to this. I think there's the process you'd expect. And I think it's about, just kind of examining any idea and any commissioning, kind of thinking, is it right for us? Should we be doing it for any of or all of those reasons, really?
I just wanted to ask, you've touched on YouTube and TikTok. I mean, first of all, what are your thoughts on YouTube now getting into the podcasting world? I put that in air quotes. And secondly, do you find a difference in the audiences that come to you? Because, one's a lean back medium, one's a, walk away background medium, the audio part. So first of all, what are your thoughts on YouTube? And secondly, what's the different audiences now that you've had success within those three mediums?
Yeah, really interesting, isn't it? It's a really interesting time. I think that, it's just an evolution really of podcasting and where it's been and where it's going. And I think there's that conversation that certainly I've been having a lot. I think everyone's having at the moment about what is a podcast, reassessing what it really means to be a podcast and, the conversation around the RSS and the conversation around YouTube. And I think that I don't think there's really a clear answer yet on that is my honest answer. I think that YouTube are clearly really important in the game. There's massive audience there, different demographic to, let's say, Apple Podcasts when you're looking at Apple or, other DSPs. So kind of huge opportunity, really. I think that's how we see it, is real opportunity. And I think it's about understanding the role of video in podcasting. And actually there isn't one answer to that, because the role of video for something like Unboxed, where we're releasing full-length video episodes on YouTube, but also kind of native in Spotify as well, is entirely different to a video strategy that we might apply for a narrative box set miniseries 6-part. It's going to be wildly different. And so I think it's about knowing really the role of video in podcasting, understanding the product that you're creating and the brand and how people are going to engage with it, where they're going to engage with it. And that does come back to the target audience and the audience you're expecting. I think it's about understanding the role of video, understanding about the content you're creating, and then understanding about the audience you're likely to attract, wanting to attract, or then are attracting. Does that answer your second part of your question?
It does, yeah. No, I mean, look, I think all three have a different feel. I mean, I'm a consumer of three platforms and I have them in different modes when I'm doing. I wouldn't want to have a long format TikTok. That wouldn't make sense. I know you can do longer formats. It just doesn't feel, it's much more of a flick, making a cup of tea, flick 3 or 4 videos, whatever it may be. YouTube maybe when I'm, want to sit back and lean back into something and just let something longer format play out at me. And then, a bit like a TV show. And then audio is probably when I'm walking the dog or I'm gardening or something else. And it's time and place and context for me with the different mediums. In terms of your monetizations, is it advertising driven then? Is that the monetization that you do today? Is there subscription driven? What's the two plans?
Yeah, it is. Yeah. So it's advertising driven, but subscription as well. And I think we're sort of, mindful of creating something that feels right for the audience and right for the platforms that they're inhabiting and the sort of where the majority of the audience for anything that we're creating live, if you like. So I think that subscriptions continues to be a really important kind of growth area of the industry, and we're sort of really mindful of that. But I think it's about, as has been proven really, when you look at the sort of subscriptions that are doing well in podcasting, it's about creating proper value for the audience, isn't it? It's about creating proper kind of additional content, as opposed to what there is quite a lot of, which is kind of just carving off a bit of the kind of stuff that hit the cutting room floor and shoving it behind a paywall. So I think it comes back to kind of deep understanding of your audience and what do they actually want, and why are they there in the first place, and have you kind of created a proper sense of community, and therefore then they might be interested in paying for something. So I think, it's about knowing the role of subs. Again, I think in podcasting is key.
Now let's move on to the podcast show. 24th, 25th of May, there is a preview on the 23rd. It's very interesting. I went there last year. I think you were there last year. They did a great job, Jason and the team. I'm really looking forward to this year's event. I think it's going to be even bigger and better, and one of the things that stood out for me was the fact that Listener's got this massive, great big stage. You've got, I don't know how many speakers on the stage, but it's significant. First of all, why have you taken such a big presence and gone for this big stage? I mean, what is this? And then talk me through some of the people that we might be able to see there.
Yeah, absolutely. So I think, as you said, I was there last year as you were, and I think that I definitely, and the rest of us that listen, recognise how great it was, really. I think the event itself just sort of caught the moment, I think, really well, which was they chose not to do it launch it in the pandemic, as they'd originally planned to, had that not happened, and launch it after the pandemic, when actually, I'm sure you probably felt the same, but most of us have been locked away for a long time. And, there hadn't been something of that scale for the podcasting industry, and the podcast industry had evolved and grown during that time as well. So it was just great. We met loads and loads of people, lots of young aspirational creators, lots of people in the industry you haven't seen for years, and made an absolute ton of kind of connections and, and networking and everything else out of it, which is all good and healthy. So I think that, very excited, obviously, about this year's event. And so, I want to make a bit more of a statement, really, to put Listen at the front and centre of that. And I was very aware of the Rise Up stages last year. And so we've thought really carefully about this. And I think it'd be good to, talk you through the overarching theme, really, of what we're doing with this stage, because I think that, you've been to as many of these events as I have, and you often do just hear different versions of the same conversation had in different places around the world. And I think it's, trying to be as distinctive as possible for anyone who's speaking there. So we're sort of, we're doing a session with LinkedIn, which is sort of all about understanding why that platform can actually be brilliant for sort of social strategy for podcasters. We've got a session which I'm chairing, which is all about sort of the intersection between TV and podcasting and the creator economy, which has got Sky on it, it's got Netflix, it's got India, who's our host for Love Island the morning after. We've got the only appearance from YouTube at the podcast show this year.
Can I have question one, please?
Well, I think there's going to be a few people in the audience, aren't there, for that one, which is great.
I think you need a few bodyguards for poor Alison. Where's question two? Wow.
Yeah, we're going to whisk her out the back and into a taxi as soon as it finishes. But so Alison Lomax, MD of YouTube UK, appearing with us alongside the brilliant Patricia Bright and Jordan on that panel, and then my partner in Josh Adley, who's Listen's MD, chairing that one. So that'll be a brilliant session not to be missed. And then a really great one on sort of just asking that question, are creators really the sort of future of podcasting? And that's with Grace Beverley, who's obviously fantastic, Johnny Manser from Spotify, and Jordan hosting that one, Marta Bino, who's from Business Insider, and Will N.E., who's that brilliant podcaster who recently knocked Joe Rogan off the top of the charts. So some great sort of, like I say, a kind of great mix of talent, of commissioners and other people who are sort of really kind of interesting, exciting in the podcast space right now, and kind of the cutting edge. And the kind of final one that I hadn't mentioned was one which really hits at what you were saying earlier, really, around the role of video and that kind of intersection between video and audio, and what is a podcast anymore. We've got a sort of session on shows versus podcasts, and kind of how creators are turning the idea of podcasting on its head, which is going to be great, with Shelby from UTA and with Madeline Argy and Jordan as well. So I'm trying to remember. I don't think I've missed any of them, but there's a lot. There's a lot.
The ones I can see, you've covered yourself in glory. You're okay. You won't have a phone call soon. Oi, why wasn't I mentioned?
I'm not doing it anymore because you forgot to mention me. No, it's really rich. I'm just excited about it, to be honest with you. It's going to be fun. It's going to be varied. And I really hope that we can offer up a lot of insights from people who are, doing things a bit differently, doing stuff outside of podcasting that informs it. I hope that useful for anyone who comes down. So we'll be there, and that's on the 24th. So we're taking the stage for the first day. Yeah.
Brilliant. Now, looking forward to all of those. Last but not least, congratulations as well. One of your staff just won a Face to Watch in pod. What was that?
Yeah, the brilliant Georgia Anadol. So she only joined us last summer. And she is a face to watch. Yeah, she's fantastic. She's doing all sorts for us. She's done the recent series of Love Island's The Morning After. And another great one that she's just polished off was the latest series of Dr. Rangan Chatterjee's wellness series that we make daily wellness series for Wondery, Amazon, which is called Built to Thrive. And so she's just literally wrapped up on that. She's just gone into a really exciting narrative pre-production at the moment. So she's fantastic. Really pleased to see her in there today. And she deserves it. And there's been a long thread of celebration, as you can imagine, on the internal Listen emails and Slack, celebrating Georgia today. So we'll get some champagne later.
No expense spared. Well done. Darby Dorris, Director of Content at Listen. Thank you so much. Now, if someone wants to get hold of you or get to find out more of what's on your slate, or just to find out what's going on at the podcast show, where would they go?
Yeah, so look for Listen in all the obvious places. Come to us, listen.co.uk, or find us on LinkedIn or, all the other socials. We're there. And you can do the same with me as well. I'm ever present, Sam. I'm everywhere. I'm all things to all people. No, I'm around. So find me. Find me on LinkedIn or somewhere, or drop me an email, which is just darby@listen.co.uk. Always happy to talk to people in the podcast industry, definitely. And hope to see a lot of people down at the podcast show. Come have a chat. I'll be around.
Brilliant. Darby, thank you so much. Speak to you soon.
Thanks, Sam.
Darby Dorris from Listen. Looking forward to seeing him at the podcast show in just a couple of weeks' time in London. And don't forget about our events too. Podnews Live, the next one is in Salford on the 13th of June. If you don't know where that is, it's next to Manchester. If you don't know where that is, it's the north of England. If you don't know where that is, just off Europe. But they don't like talking about it. On June the 13th, you can grab tickets for that, podnews.net/live. And also Podnews Live in London is happening on the 27th of September. Can we talk about the venue yet for that?
Yes, we can confirm it's going to be the White City Soho House venue, which is the old BBC White City studios. So.
Yes, old TV centre. So if you fancy a wander around the old television centre, then we can guarantee you'll be able to get into at least one room of that.
I was going to say, I think most of those are people's private flats now, James. I don't think we can really guide anyone around it.
Yes. Some of his people's private flats where I used to go to the occasional depressing meeting. So I do hope that they've made those rooms a little bit nicer. But anyway, 27th of September, that's happening. Podnews.net/live to find out more information about that. And there are more events, both paid for and free, at Podnews. If you're organising something, you should tell the world about it too. It's free to be listed, podnews.net/events.
Boostergram Corner on the Podnews Weekly Review.
Oh, it's our favourite time of the week, Sam. It's time for Boostergram Corner, and this is an exciting message that we've got from Chad F., isn't it?
Yes, he says sending a test boost from Podcast Guru on iOS. So he sent us 2112 sats.
Yes, and that basically means that Podcast Guru is just getting ready to turn on Boostergrams and support for streaming sats. So that's going to be a very exciting thing. So thrilled that Podcast Guru, which is a really nice looking app, it's on iOS and on Android, and they're going to be supporting Boostergrams on both of those. Who knows? It might even be out as we speak. But well worth a peek. Thank you, Chad, for your 2112 sats. That's good of you. Kyrin from the Mere Mortals podcast. My second chat with Dave came out this week. We finally got to the heart of what's making him sick all of the time. I'm presuming this is Dave Jones.
Indeed.
But we also had some fun value for value chat and why everyone is pumped for music. And he's given us 4, 3, 2, 1 sats. Kyrin, thank you so much. And the Mere Mortals podcast is well worth a listen. Kyrin properly does his research.
He does.
And there's a show with you.
Yes.
And there's a show with me if you go back. So well worth a listen to that as well.
Silas on Linux said, what if you did a comparison chart between advertising solutions comparing each host/company's programmatic solution, how high the CPM is, also compared to averages for host-read ads or things like Buzzsprout ads, where it's an in-between. Or maybe an article could be helpful for people who want to start podcasting with the final goal of financially sustaining themselves with the podcast. I'm going to put that through ChatGPT to understand that in a minute. But anyway, that's 3,000 sats.
I know exactly what Silas on Linux or Silas on Linux is saying. Yes, absolutely. Yes, that would be an amazing comparison chart. Let's focus firstly on the comparison chart of the functions and features that podcast hosts and podcast apps have. And then, yeah, absolutely. Let's move on to ad tech as well. Why not?
Got it.
Why not? What could possibly go wrong there? But yes, Silas, thank you so much for that. And thank you for the sats as well. We much appreciate them. And Gene Bean as well. Mad props to Oscar for the implementation of transcripts within Fountain. They look really good. I think, Gene Bean, you're talking about a beta that you shouldn't be talking about yet because I don't think they're launched yet. But when they get launched, I'm told that they'll look really, really good.
Now,
row of ducks.
Now, can I point out,
Gene Bean? Yes.
You're an advisor. Have you got that beta?
Have I got the beta? I probably do have the beta.
Right.
Yes, I have been. In fact, yesterday's job, one of yesterday's jobs was writing Fountain's article about transcripts and shamelessly adding, links to various places and making sure that it was really clear. So I enjoyed doing that, and I'm looking forward to meeting Oscar because I've not met Oscar yet,
right.
and Nick. Looking forward to meeting them the week of the podcast show.
Yeah.
We're going out and camping out in their office for a little bit. You may hear a Podnews Daily, which has been recorded in their office as well, so that should be good fun. But yes, looking forward to that.
And in case anyone keeps asking, we keep promising Oscar on this show. We do keep promising Oscar on this show.
That?
Well, Oscar keeps going, I'm not quite ready yet. So, yes. So, as an advisor, can you kick him up the backside to tell him to hurry up and get ready, please?
Well, let's find out. Let's find out when I see him in a couple of weeks. Let's find out whether we can do it then. If you get value from what we do, the Podnews Weekly Review is separate from Podnews. Sam and I share everything from this show, so we really appreciate your support so we can continue making it. You can become a power supporter at weekly.podnews.net if you've got a credit card burning a hole in your pocket right now. If you fancy supporting Tim Apple, then you can subscribe in Apple Podcasts at apple.co/podnews. One of these days I'm going to actually understand the Apple Podcasts Connect system so I can actually understand whether or not we've got any subscribers, because I don't know. Or you can support us with sats, which is what we prefer, by hitting the boost button in your podcast app. If you don't have a boost button in your podcast app, then, I mean, really, where are you? But podnews.net/new podcast apps will help you find a new one. And of course, I would recommend Fountain. Now, what's happening for you this week, Sam?
Well, as I said, I met up with Darby Doris over at Podpitch at City University this week. Really good to see all the students on their journalism course pitching new podcast ideas. There was Matt Hill there and Elena Guthrie from History Hits. So, yeah, it was a good evening. Some 3 or 4 that were really good standouts. A couple of were, and 1 or 2 hit the cutting room floor. But other than that, it was very good. And of course, I mentioned that I was on with Dave and Adam last week talking about Podfans and various other things to do with Podcasting 2.0. So that was a fun evening. And lastly, I can't tell you any more about it, but I was really pleased to catch up with Ellie Rubenstein, who's the CEO of Pocketcast and the lead on that. They are doing stuff with the Podcasting Index 2.0, and hopefully Ellie will be with us in, well, not sure the time frame, but she will be on this show shortly to talk about what Pocketcasts are doing in that market space.
Oh, well, I'm looking forward to hearing more about that. That should be fun.
Maybe she'll come on before Oscar. We never know.
Maybe.
Now, James, what's happening for you?
You're only saying that just so that you can wind Oscar up, aren't you? I think
I am.
I think that's the thing.
And I've met him, so I've got at least one advantage over you. I have actually met Oscar twice.
No, I had a really good chat with Patrick Hill from Disktopia for the Podcast Business Journal. You'll find that in next week's edition of the Podcast Business Journal, podcastbusinessjournal.com. This week, Ben Richardson from RSS.com is on talking about what that company is doing in Mexico, because you might think it's just a podcast hosting company, but oh no, they're doing other things in Mexico. So I thought I'd find out a little bit more about what's going on there. I also managed to completely sleep in and miss a very important meeting that I was due to have, so that was good. Note to self, always check before you go to sleep whether or not you're supposed to be waking up early. That's probably a good plan. What I'm very much looking forward to is going to New Zealand over the weekend, as I mentioned before. I've got basically a day and a half there. It's only 4 hours flight away, but looking forward to that, to the New Zealand Podcast Summit. So I will be back next week with all kinds of news and information about how the New Zealand podcast industry is working. I also have to do a presentation to some people in Italy on Monday, which I'm looking forward to, even if I haven't written that presentation, nor have I written the presentation yet for New Zealand, nor have I written the presentation for the podcast show London, and all of those are due in about 3 hours. So,
good luck.
Good. So that'll be fun. So I better go. That's it for this week.
Yes, thank you to our guests. And if you want to give us feedback using email, you can do that at weekly@podnews.net or send us a Boostgram. And if your podcast app doesn't support Boost, as you said, James, what are you doing? Grab a new app from podnews.net/new podcast apps.
Our music is from Studio Dragonfly. Our voiceover is Sheila D. We're hosted and sponsored by Buzzsprout. Podcast hosting made easy.
Get updated every day. Subscribe to our newsletter at podnews.net. Tell your friends and grow the show.
And support us.
The Pod News Weekly Review will return next week. Keep listening.